Welcome back, chess friends, to 1834, where sardonic, sweary Frenchman Bourdonnais is playing against the plucky underdog Irishman Father McDonnell. The state of play in this match of 21 games, draws not counting, is that Bourdonnais has won 13 games to McDonnell's 3. So he's already won this match, but we're here basically to find out whether McDonnell can win a consolation game again. So let's see how he does. We've got Bourdonnais with the white pieces, and he plays e4. e5 from McDonnell, bishop to c4, bishop to c5 mirroring, and queen to e2 from Bourdonnais. And we have Morphy in 1859 commentating. He says, "For notes on the opening, see the 19th game between the same players." Well, in the 19th game, they did indeed play the same opening, which Morphy calls the Lopez Gambit. McDonnell actually played d4 and then went on to win his first consolation game, so that was good. He's I think doing the right thing to play the same opening. But Morphy at that time said that he preferred a whole bunch of different moves and went on a tirade about different variations, most of which were knight to f6 and then f4. So what happened in this game? Well, McDonnell played knight to f6, so I hope he does still go on to win this game even with this variation. Bourdonnais continues, d3, knight to c6, c3, knight to e7, and Morphy says, "Premature and a loss of time. Black should have played d6 or castles." Okay, Morphy, he didn't. He played knight to e7. And then we have f4, and then e captures f4. And again, Morphy says, "It is seldom advisable to capture this pawn in the Lopez Gambit." So Morphy's in a grumpy mood today, which we always like. So okay, f4, e captures. And now instead of capturing the pawn straight away, Bourdonnais pushes d4 to attack the black bishop, which of course retreats, and now he captures the pawn. And McDonnell continues with d6, maybe a bit late now. Morphy says, "This pawn should have been played to d5 to break up the advanced centre pawns." Okay, but d6 was played instead. We have a bishop back to d3 and knight to g6. And bishop to e3 and castles finally by McDonnell. h3. The engine says that knight to f3 was better here, but h3 was played instead. And in fact, over the next, 10 or so moves, the engine is a bit whingy. It doesn't like anything that either player moves, so we'll just ignore the engine for now. We'll keep the flow going. We have rook to e8 along the semi-open file here, and we have knight to d2 developing, queen to e7 doubling up along the e file. We have castles queenside. Very nice. And then c5 immediately attacking. Now, king to b1, trying to get the king into an even safer position on the queen side. And c captures, and McDonnell wants to further pressure the king on the queen side with a5. Bourdonnais kind of ignores it and develops his last knight, and McDonnell develops his last bishop. So both players have got all their pieces developed. Very nice. And we have g4 from Bourdonnais. He wants to attack on the king's side now. This is what generally happens when the kings are castled opposite sides. We end up with pawn attacks on both sides of the board. h6, and Bourdonnais brings his rook across, so now both rooks are x-raying the king side here, so very nice for him. How does McDonnell react? Well, he just ignores it and pushes his a pawn once more. We have g5, so Bourdonnais makes first contact with his pawn pushes, and McDonnell captures, and the bishop recaptures. And now McDonnell pushes his pawn once again to a3. We have b3, so that's how Bourdonnais deals with it. He just pushes his b pawn. Bishop to c6, which focuses a lot of attention on the central pawn here. So what does Bourdonnais do? Well, he plays his rook to g4 to add another defender. And initially this looks a bit weird because it's under attack from the knight, but then you realize the knight's actually pinned because the bishop would take the queen if it took the rook. Okay, so the engine in this position likes rook to a5, but McDonnell doesn't. He plays his bishop there instead, which threatens this knight. Bourdonnais ignores it and pushes his h-pawn. So McDonnell just captures the knight, and the other knight captures it back. McDonnell now plays rook to a5, and then Bourdonnais just pushes h5, attacking the bishop. Now, rather than retreating the knight, McDonnell decides to capture it with the rook. And Morphy says, "An examination of the position will satisfy the reader that the retreat of the knight would have subjected black to an attack which would have soon proved irresistible. By thus sacrificing the exchange, black in turn assumes the opposite, the only course which gave promise of a favourable result. Now, the engine also agrees with this in this position, but actually the engine would have liked McDonnell not to play this rook to a5 move, but to unpin the queen and double attack the rook. That would have been a better solution from a few moves earlier, but okay, that wasn't played. We have the rook sacrificing the exchange here. Now the pawn is still attacking the knight, so McDonnell moves the knight out of the way, which also attacks the queen and the bishop. So Bourdonnais moves the queen out of the way, but McDonnell just grabs the bishop. Now Morphy says, if the queen captures the knight, then follows on the part of black, knight captures e4 with a 1 game. Okay, so Bourdonnais didn't capture this knight straight away. He pushed pawn to d5 and attacked the bishop. However, McDonnell doesn't care. He just captures this d5 pawn with the knight. And how does Bourdonnais respond? Does he capture the knight back, or does he capture this knight back? Well, he does neither. He brings his rook across to g1, lining them all up, x-raying the king here, which is looking quite dangerous for McDonnell. Morphy comments on this. He says, "Well played. The game, which has now become critical for both parties, is, by both, conducted with skill and judgment. Had white now played any other move than the one adopted, he must have speedily lost. Suppose first rook captures knight, then bishop captures rook, queen captures d3, the bishop captures the pawn, the knight captures the bishop, and the queen captures the knight, and black, having 5 pawns to 3, now compels an exchange of queens and must win. Or pawn captures bishop, queen to e3, queen captures e3, the best, and the rook captures the queen, again winning through his superiority in pawns. And secondly, if in this position, if queen captures d3 immediately, then queen captures rook, e captures d5, and queen captures d5, and black wins. And thirdly, if the pawn captures the knight, then queen captures the rook, queen captures d3, best, and queen captures d5, and we have the same position as in the last variation, as in black wins. Okay, so none of that was played, which Morphy likes. We have, finding the position, here we are, we have rook to g1, and Morphy likes this. Knight to c3 with check, and the king has only 2 squares to go to. Morphy comments on this one. He says if king to c2, then the queen captures rook, rook captures queen, and now the black knight forks the white king and queen. So the king captures the knight, and the knight captures the queen, knight captures knight, and finally rook captures pawn, and black must win. And it appears that Bourdonnais agrees with Morphy here, and so instead of king to c2, he plays his king into the corner at a1, which is looking pretty bad for the king, but also good for McDonnell, so good stuff. So McDonnell plays on with bishop captures the pawn, and of course this attacks the queen, but Bourdonnais just ignores it and goes for rook captures on g7 with check, backed up by his other rook. And of course McDonnell has to move his king into the opposite corner to the white king. So both players with their kings in the corners under a lot of pressure. So who's going to come out on top? Well, let's find out. We have queen to g3, adding even more pressure along this g file, so McDonnell has to deal with this. So he plays bishop to g6, trying to block, and Morphy says, "This move should have cost black the game. Black's proper course was to play queen to f6, a move not only productive of many highly interesting variations, but one which would have ensured the game." Okay, Morphy, I'm not going to bore you with all of Morphy's highly interesting variations. I'll just take you through his first one because it just demonstrates the idea. So queen to f6, rook delivers check, the king moves, and the queen comes in with check again, so queen captures, the other rook captures, and the king just moves out of the way. Now rook to e8, and then the black knight comes to b4. And Morphy says, white cannot prolong the contest beyond a few moves. So the point here being is that the white king is blocked in by this knight and pawn, and it's just up to this knight to deliver the final checkmate to end the game. And whatever white does, he can't stop this. He can't even bring the rook back here to help the defense because the knight's blocking this square. So really tied up in knots, the king here. All white can do is just lose all his pieces. For example, check, captures, check, captures, and then what can he do? Captures here, and then it's still checkmate whatever happens. So all of Morphy's highly interesting variations are some variant of this checkmate, which is very nice. So we'll go back. Instead of this queen move being played, as we said, the bishop came back to g6, and we continue. Pawn captures the bishop, and McDonnell brings his queen to e1, delivering a check, which of course completely blunders the game. So good job, McDonnell, throwing away your consolation game again. So how does this work? Well, the knight blocks on b1, queen captures the queen, this rook delivers a check, so the king moves, and now this pawn captures the pawn, delivering a check, and the king captures the rook. Now instead of queening straight away, the rook delivers another check, so the king comes back, and now the pawn captures the rook and queens at the same time, and white easily scores the game. However, that did not happen. That was just a variation that Morphy provided us with. So Bourdonnais did not play this knight to b1 move. McDonnell is still in it. So what happened? So Bourdonnais captures with the rook here, and McDonnell captures back. And now we have the queen captures, giving up the queen here because there's not much left for Bourdonnais to do. This is now threatening the checkmate on c2. And so we continue with the rook checking here, but it's just last-ditch stuff again because nothing can stop this knight coming in. The king moves here, and now we have the pawn capturing, and the king captures the rook, and the last thing that Bourdonnais can do is promote to a knight, which is quite fun, and that delivers a check. The king moves, and now Bourdonnais doesn't have any move that he can do that stops the checkmate. He just does knight to b1, and then we have knight to c2, delivering the checkmate. So good job, McDonnell, winning your second consolation game. I imagine he went off to his room and had a quiet celebration and maybe thought about what he was going to do in the next game. And I imagine Bourdonnais swore loudly and stormed off before coming back to smoke some cigars and drink a bit more. So very nice. 13 games to 4 now, and I'll see you again next time to see if McDonnell can win anything else. See you then.